Let's start this section by learning about array destructuring. So as I said in the intro video, in this section we're basically going to continue learning basic syntax and basic JavaScript features, but now with a focus on more modern JavaScript. And the theme of this section will be to simulate a food delivery application, and in specific one Italian restaurant, which is this starter data here that we already have in the starter files. And so this one is called Classico Italiano. So I already opened up the starter files here for this project. Okay. Now, learning complex topics like the ones we're gonna dive into in this section is really best done in isolation. This way you can understand exactly what I'm trying to teach you without having to think about 5 other things at the same time. And so I'm isolating just this one restaurant and building no user interface so that we can focus just on the JavaScript language here. And some people will say that this is boring, but believe me, I do have enough teaching experience to know that some topics are best learned in isolation. And for me, the most important thing is that you will actually learn in this course. Now, of course, there are also topics that can be applied to a visual project. And that's why in the next section, we have a really cool project with an amazing user interface where we're going to learn about array methods. But for now, let's focus on built-in data structures and modern advanced operators. And again, starting with array destructuring. So destructuring is an ES6 feature, and it's basically a way of unpacking values from an array or an object into separate variables. So in other words, destructuring is to break a complex data structure down into a smaller data structure like a variable. So for arrays, we use destructuring to retrieve elements from the array and store them into variables in a very easy way. So let's just actually start with a very simple array. And now if we wanted to retrieve each one into its own variable without destructuring, we would do it like this. Let's say we wanted to name them A, B, C. And so we would write the name of the array, which I totally forgot up here. So R0, and then just duplicating this line, which I'm using Command or Option L for. And I'm not sure if that is actually a shortcut in VS Code. Let me see here. And apparently it's not. Let's see here. Duplicate selection. So it's this duplicate selection here. And you can set up a shortcut for that. And so I will just do that. So B, and so that would be element number 1, and number 2 would be C. So that's how we would retrieve these 3 elements. But now with destructuring, we can actually declare all the 3 variables at the same time. So let me show you how. So const, and then we use the square brackets, and so that's because we are destructuring an array. And so now we can declare 3 variables at the same time. And now I'm not using A, B, and C because we already used them. So let's go with X, Y, and Z. And then I will simply set that equal to the array. And that's it. So let's actually see them now in the console. Give it a save, and then we need to start our live server with a new terminal. And actually I can hit the tab key now, and it will then automatically write the rest of the command. Then close that down. And as you can see, here we get the 2 results, 2, 3, and 4. So the elements of the array. So basically we write this syntax here, and then this will become the first element of the array, this the second, and this the third. And so this here is destructuring this array here from the right side. Okay, and of course this looks like an array, but it's really not. It's just the destructuring assignment. So whenever JavaScript sees this here on the left side of the equal sign, it knows that it should do destructuring. Now when you do this, just don't forget to actually also declare the variables using const. Okay? And I also wanted to notice that even though we did destructuring, which sounds kind of destructive, right? The original array is of course not affected. Okay, so we are not destroying here the array, we are only destructuring. So we are unpacking it. Okay, and now let's work a little bit with the data from our restaurant. So here we see that we have a couple of arrays here actually. So the categories, the starter menu, and the main menu. So let's take some elements out of the categories. So let's say, and then the destructuring assignment, first and second. All right. And so now you see here that we do not have to take all of the elements out of the array. So this will just take the first and the second. So it will simply follow the order of the elements here and will basically only take these two. And so now the array from which we want to extract, and that's restaurant.categories. Just to take a look now. And indeed, we get Italian and pizzeria, which are exactly the first two elements of the array. But now let's say that we only wanted to take the first category, so this one, and the third. So let's say that this one is the main category and this is the secondary for some reason. Well, to do that, we simply leave a hole in the destructuring operator. So what I mean is just this. And so now the second element will be skipped, so the one that would go here, and then this second here simply becomes this third element. And now, so you see that second now is vegetarian, which is element number 3. All right. And so like this, we don't have to create variables for all the stuff that we might not even need. So if we only need to take this and this, we just skip the element in the middle. Okay. And this is really powerful, and we use destructuring to do a lot of cool things. For example, let's say that the owner of the restaurant now decided to switch the main and the secondary category. So right now the primary is Italian and the secondary is vegetarian, but now they wanted to switch it. So let's first change the name here to main and secondary, just to make it a bit more obvious. Second array. And so if we would like to switch these two variables, then without destructuring, we would have to do it like this. We would need to create a temporary variable, and then to that we would assign one of them. So let's say main, and then we could switch main. We would say main is equal to the secondary, and then secondary is equal to temp, because that's where we temporarily stored the value of main, right? We could not just do main equals secondary and then secondary equals main, because by then we would already have overwritten the main variable, right? And that's why we need this temporary variable in the middle. So that's how we would do it. But with destructuring, we can make it a lot easier. And this is how we do it. First, we create an array with both of them. And the first one is going to be the secondary. And then the second one will be the main. And actually, before we do that, let me just show you that this worked. So main and secondary. And so now we should see them switched. Oh, okay. Here we need to change, of course, to let, because we are reassigning here to a const in line 24. So let's try that now. And indeed, what was Italian is now vegetarian, and what was vegetarian is now Italian. So this here worked indeed, but let's now take this out. so that we can do it using destructuring. So as I was saying, in order to switch the two variables using destructuring, we would first start by creating a new array with the two variables inverted. So first secondary and then main, and then we can simply destruct them. So main and secondary equals the destructuring of this array. And now we're not using let or const here because we are simply reassigning the values of the two variables. So just like we did here. But now we do not need a temporary variable in the middle. So let's check now. And indeed, the result is the same. But this is a lot easier. And this is a trick here that I actually use all the time. So let me just show here, or actually write here, switching variables. Okay, so that's a pretty cool trick. And another trick with destructuring is that we can have a function return an array, and then we can immediately destruct the result into different variables. And so this basically allows us to return multiple values from a function. And so let's try that and write a function to order food. So here in our restaurant, let's now add a method. And I'm going to call it order. So this will be a function and it will accept two parameters. One index for the starter menu, so this menu, and then one index for the main menu. And then the person will order basically by giving the index for each of the menus. So something very simple, just to illustrate the point here. So let's say starter index and main index. Okay, and so we will simply now return the content of the arrays based on the given indexes. So return. And so as I said, we're going to return an array. And then we go to this dot starter menu. Okay, and remember how this keyword here is set, as we learned in the last section. And so now we go to the position of the starter index that we passed into the function. Okay, that makes sense. Then the same with the main menu at the position of the main index that is passed in. All right, so here we are, of course, not doing any destructuring yet, but now is the time where we will do it. So let's call order, or in fact, restaurant.order, and let's use 2 and 0. So we want element number 2 from the starter menu, so the garlic bread, and the number 0 from the main menu, which is pizza. So we're going to receive an array with that, right? Let me just show that to you. And indeed, it is garlic bread and pizza. And so now we can simply destructure that. So this is the destructuring assignment. And so let's say starter and main should equal these two results. So let's log them, starter and main. Oh, and now this was already defined before. So let's just call this one here the main course. And now indeed we get garlic bread and pizza. All right, so this is how we basically receive two return values from a function. All right. So of course, we could have done that without destructuring and still return an array from the function, but this is a very handy way of then immediately creating two variables out of one function call. Okay, and now that you understand how destructuring works, let's take it one step further. Because what happens if we have a nested array? So let's say nested. And with nested, we mean one array inside another. So let's say that we now here have another array, 5 and 6. So an array inside an array. And I'm not sure if we did that before, but of course that's perfectly acceptable. So as a small exercise, how can we get this value here and this entire array? Well, we simply define two new variables using the destructuring assignment. Let's call them I and j. And remember that we do not want in the middle. So we just skip it. So simply leave a space and then another comma, and then this one is going to be j equals to the array from which they should be taken. And indeed, we get the number 2 and then the array 5 and 6. Great, but what if we actually wanted all the individual values? Well, then we would essentially have to do destructuring inside of destructuring. So that sounds complicated, but it's not. So let's take out these here, and let's create now 3 variables. So one for this, one for the 5, and one for the 6. So we're going to skip the 4 again. So that's going to be I, then again the whole here, and now here we can destruct this inner array immediately. So we use the destructuring here again, and so now j for the first element and k for the second. So for 5 and 6. And then again the array from which to take. And then let's take a look. And so this should now give us 2, 5, and 6 as separate variables. And yes. So that's how nested destructuring works. Basically, we need to do destructuring inside of destructuring. Okay, and now to finish, there's just another feature of destructuring that I want to show you. So we can also set default values for the variables when we are extracting them. And that's going to be very useful in the case that we don't know the length of the array. And this can sometimes happen in real-world applications, as you will see later. So if we have an array that is shorter than we might think, then we might try to unpack the array in positions that don't even exist. So let me say here just default values, and here nested destructuring. So learning a lot of stuff here about destructuring. And so let's now say that we have this array, 8 and 9, and then we are trying to destructure it. So just pretend that we actually don't know the array, all right? And so we might try to take 3 elements out of the array using, again, destructuring. So let's call them P, Q, and R. And then let's try to log them all, P, Q, and R. And so now here we get undefined as the third one. So this would basically be the same as trying to read the element at position number 2 of this array. But it only has elements at position 0 and 1. And so therefore we then get undefined. But as I said, we can set default values. So let's simply set them all to 1. And then our R will become 1. Great. And if we remove this element, then Q will also become 1. Okay? And as I said, this can sometimes be useful, for example, when we get data from an API. And so we're going to probably use this one and actually everything that we did in this lecture a bit later in the course.